Hi, everyone. I want to talk to you about my top 10 from Mounce chapters 10 and 11. Let's start with chapter 10. This is a chapter to read and refer back to anytime you do the study of a word in English or Greek, and hopefully you're going to be studying Greek now that you're learning it. And studying the words in it because they are often so meaningful. There's not much for me to add to what Mounce has to say, but let me emphasize a few things that he talks about. First of all, my tip number one, the term semantic range. That's worth knowing. As Mounce says, it denotes a bundle of meanings, a group of meanings associated with a particular Greek word, much like a group of meanings is associated with any particular English word. Um, the standard Greek lexicon is called BAGD, Bar, Art, Gingrich, Danker. A Greek lexicon of the New Testament and other early Christian literature, and that traces the bundle of meanings that are associated with particular words in the New Testament and other early Christian literature. Uh, so, a lexicon or a dictionary allows you to get in touch with the range of meanings, the semantic range associated with any particular word in Greek. You will read commentators talking about the semantic range of a word's meaning. For example, they'll talk about the semantic range of meaning for a word in the Gospel of John. Then, after they mention that, they will usually come down to letting you know what their decision is about the meaning of a word in its particular context, in the particular place where it's being used in the Gospel of John. So it's important to have that conceptual framework of what a semantic range is and what meaning in context really is trying to tell you. My tip number two, Mounce outlines the steps for a word study very well to you. And the first step he outlines is about how to select a word, how to choose a word, how to do that in English. That's where we usually begin our study. And I want to encourage you to let God's Spirit interact with you as you make your choice and select a word to study. Let God's Spirit interact with you both intellectually and spiritually, drawing your attention to a particular word, drawing your curiosity to the meaning of a particular word. That's the way that you select a word. Tip number three is Mounce's second step in a word study. He says, secondly, identify the Greek word that underlies the English word that you've noticed. You can do this with your software really easily. There's no need to move through the long process that Mounce outlines. He outlines it that way for those without any kind of biblical software. Oh, and like everything in Mounce, when he does make comments about software stuff, realize those comments are now 8 years old. Tip number four is Mounce's step number three in word study. Research and discover the semantic range of possible meanings associated with the Greek word that you're studying. We've talked about that, so I won't say more about that here. My tip number five is his step number four in word study. And his step number four says, move out now to explore the meaning of the word in wider contexts than the semantic range of the New Testament. Explore within the semantic range of the New Testament first, and then outside that range, explore in different contexts. Use the circles of context diagram on page 53. Make that your friend as you think about doing a word study. That will show you how to move out from the center of the ring toward the outside of the ring. Do what you have time and interest to do in this respect. You may not always get to the most outside circle. That's all right. The inside circle is the most important. It's the most immediate literary context. But again, your software is going to be a huge help in doing this, and we'll be learning how this week and practicing a bit with the software. My tip number six is his step number five in doing a word study. He says, come to a decision about the meaning of the word you're studying in its specific context, the place where you found it, the place where you saw it and wanted to know more about it. But as you do that, keep the meaning or sense of the larger literary context, the larger unit in mind. This is what Mounce says on page 59 in particular. You can read it there. And watch out for what Mounce calls common mistakes in word studies. That's found on pages 57 through 59. So let's move now from chapter 10 to chapter 11. My tip number 7 is about chapter 11. This is a chapter to read and to refer back to. It outlines some of the ways noun cases can be and are used in the New Testament to convey different kinds of meanings than the main ones that you learned when you first met noun cases in Mounce chapter 5. My tip number 8, don't try to memorize all the ways noun cases can be used that are presented to you in this chapter. But do read through the chapter. Begin to familiarize yourself in a beginning way with what Mounce has to say. My tip number 9, you will find Klink and Novakovic, and later on in our course, Murray Harris and Colin Cruz, when we get to 2 Corinthians. You will find all these folks talking to you about nouns and different cases and their meanings. And there are more than you can find in any of these resources, more than Mounce presents to you in his textbook as well. If you want, you can look at some of these more meanings quickly in deeper Greek in chapters 2 and 3 and 4. That's where he discusses nouns, but there's no need to read those chapters carefully. This is a book that you want to use to refer back to things. You can use the indexes in the back to help you do that quickly and easily, or you can decide that you want to read a chapter at some point and just skim through all of it. But it's basically a reference book for you to use in this course and after this course in your ministry. And it's always wise, whenever you exegete or interpret a text, to check the scripture index for the text that you're studying in deeper Greek and in commentaries that you're using. If you're preaching on John, you've got a couple. If you're preaching on 2 Corinthians, you'll have a couple after this course. Look in those scripture indexes, see if the scripture index directs you back to comments about special meanings that pertain to the cases in the particular verse that you're interested in. My final tip for you is tip number 10. It's on chapter 11. Don't get overwhelmed about chapter 10 or chapter 11. Remember, yes, we are out of foundational Greek as we move to chapter 11. That means we're now learning more about what we already learned in chapters 1 through 9 about Greek. We are building in chapter 11 on the basic foundation of understanding New Testament Greek. But as you do that, don't try and retain or memorize. Read and learn to gain initial familiarity. You will always be able, when you do a word study, to look back at Mounce chapter 10. You will always be able, when you're puzzled about the meaning of a certain case, to look back to Mounce chapter 11, or to use the Mounce laminated study sheet. If you look on that study sheet on the front page in the right column, you'll see nouns and their cases and meanings that will direct you back into the textbook. You can always use the index in deeper Greek, or the glossary or index in the handbook to John by Novakovic to help you understand how a noun case is being used in a particularly meaningful way in any particular part of the Gospel of John or 2 Corinthians, and why it's being translated in a certain way. So I hope these 10 tips are helpful to you as you study Mounce chapters 10 and 11. And if you've got any questions, please do feel free to get in touch with me and let me try and help you out and interact with you individually.